Hello everybody, welcome to the Mesothelioma UK series of interviews. We're continuing with these and we're hoping that you're enjoying them and they are of interest to you. My name is Lorraine Creech, I'm Head of Nursing for Mesothelioma UK, and I'm really pleased to interview Liz Darlison today, who is our CEO. In fact, CEO is a new term for Liz, so perhaps Liz, if you could just mention a little bit about the change of your title.
Yeah, well, thank you. Hi, everybody. Seems very strange, Lorraine and I being we're normally interviewing other people, but it's a real delight. So, CEO, I guess, Mesothelioma UK is a growing charity, and we're a charity that's been born out of the NHS, and and I guess if you cut me through the middle, I've got NHS, through the core of me, a bit like a stick of rock, but Meso UK has grown its independence, and we became an independent charity 10 years ago or so now, more than that. But for the longest time, it didn't feel that we were quite ready for a structure that had a CEO. So for the longest time, I just remained a nurse consultant. And then eventually, as the team grew a little bit over the last 5 years, we made my job head of services. But increasingly, we've got more and more involved in a variety of different forums. And I'd be sitting around the table with my counterparts from other charities, and they were all CEOs. And then I would say that I'm head of service, and it just seemed a bit of a nondescript title. So we thought it was time the charity had a CEO. So that's how it happened, really, that we thought it was the charity needed that title. We'd grown sufficiently to warrant a CEO.
I suppose I should tell people that I'm taking liberties here because, as we say, it seems strange for Liz and I to be having this interview, and I'm throwing questions at her without really telling her what I was going to do beforehand, which in good practice I would have done before. So that was a probing question, which she didn't know was coming until this afternoon. So there we are. Now, we're conducting this interview on the 18th of March, and I can't proceed any further without talking about yesterday, which was the HSJ Awards. And we were entered into the awards, and with great delight, we won an award, which I'm pleased to share with you. And it's an accolade for all of Mesothelioma UK, but particularly for those who work in the Armed Forces Project. And our title for the project was Supporting the Armed Forces Project. And we were very pleased to win the award in the Military and Civilian Health Partnership category. And this is a completely new arena over the past few years for Mesothelioma UK and nurses like ourselves. So Liz, just tell us how we got to that point, please.
Well, I guess the number of nurses that we've got in the charity has grown significantly, and you have to remind me often how many we've got. I think we're at 32 currently, and but over the last 5 or 6 years we've grown significantly, from maybe 10 or so through the 20s and so on, and that means we've had a bigger footprint across the UK. And it was the nurses, when we get together, because we have lots of networking and communication and meetings with the nurses, it's all about keeping them really at the cutting edge in terms of their skills and expertise for meso. And it was at one of those network meetings where we just kind of talking about what we'd been experiencing. It became apparent that we were all getting a bit concerned about the number of veterans that we were seeing, that, actually people's armed forces service was probably more significant than what we'd realised. And, that's happened with a number of things. We've been concerned about the number of healthcare professionals, and we've done some research into that. We've been concerned about the experience of women, and we've done some research into that. We're looking at doing some similar research in education workers. But at that time, it was armed forces. And so we wanted to act on that hunch that there was a concern, this concern about the number of armed forces personnel and veterans. And of course, anecdote and hunches isn't enough, really. You need good, rigorous evidence to be able to develop services. If you're going to spend public money on something, you've got to be pretty sure that you're spending it wisely. And the other thing was, the nurses were saying that, you know, not many of us have got any armed forces background, and we felt a bit inadequate in terms of how best to look after and support these veterans, because what we were finding was that in their hour of need, actually, veterans, you know, if they've become disengaged from their armed forces roots, it's a time that they really want to re-engage and connect with those armed forces roots. And so putting all that together, we decided that we wanted to do some rigorous inquiry into that and develop a range of resources, bespoke and suitable, and upskill the team really to be able to meet the needs of these veterans and their families. And thankfully, the Covenant Fund, that was then called the LIBOR Fund, was putting out a call for grants. We applied, we were successful in being awarded a grant through that fund, which we're very grateful for. And then that enabled us to engage with our research colleagues at Sheffield, develop a work team with, you know, veterans. Brian Wallace has been, you know, crucial to it. Our comms team were involved. We appointed a benefits advisor in conjunction with HASAG, a nurse dedicated to the armed forces, and really embarked on a 3-year project, and we didn't know where it was going to take us. And what we've learned is that actually the problem is bigger than what we thought, probably. Nobody really had a handle on the impact of asbestos on the armed forces. I think a lot of people were concerned, but nobody had rigorously researched that and got the evidence. And that's what we've managed to do. And alongside that, we've managed to run some really highbrow awareness campaigns about asbestos in the armed forces. We've managed to engage and become part of the armed forces community through COPSIO, that we're really grateful to, and we're working with other COPSIO members on a number of issues now, and really we've been able to shine a light on this issue of asbestos in the armed forces. And we now know that, you know, hundreds of veterans probably are dying each year of mesothelioma, and we're better able to support them now. Of course, we're not done, and you know, the award has been, you know, an amazing accolade, and you know, it kind of, after all that hard work, it's, you know, it's an amazing stamp of approval, really. But more than anything, it's a platform for us, because we really do need to now embed into our day-to-day practice and sustain what we've learned, and, you know, roll out even more, so that we can meet the needs of our armed forces. Because if we can't get it right for people who've put their life into public service, then you know, it's a pretty poor show, really. So yeah, it's been an amazing journey, and very uncharted waters for me personally, because I don't have any armed forces background, but it's been a joy and a privilege, and I'm quite excited really to see where we can take it, and hopefully we can help the armed forces to rid their environment of asbestos, but at least raise awareness of asbestos in their environment, raise awareness of asbestos diseases amongst the armed forces, and particularly the health professionals working closely with the armed forces. Hopefully we can make the NHS better for our armed forces, and help the NHS to engage more with the armed forces community, because there are some amazing armed forces charities, and the support out there for our veterans is pretty phenomenal, and we didn't really understand any of that. There are some other things, you know, we know that there are some issues that our armed forces colleagues, our veterans, are perhaps not treated the same as civilians diagnosed in terms of compensation and benefits, and we want to address that. But all in all, it's been a really collaborative partnership project that has made some tangible improvements, and has a lot of potential for doing even more for our veterans. And at the end of the day, that's got to be a good thing, you know. And we're delighted the HSJ, you know, they didn't disappoint last night. It's a shame we didn't get the frilly frock and the trip to London, and, you know, as a team, but we were all together on a parallel Zoom call, and we really enjoyed the evening, a good morale booster. So we're very grateful to the HSJ.
We should say that this is an event that would have been taking place in some major city in the UK, usually in London, in a very glittering ballroom.
Yeah, like the Grosvenor.
Yeah, that's right. And the compere last night was Lenny Henry, and the interviews were by Victoria Derbyshire. And I think the HSJ did all they could to bring it to life in this very different world that we're in at the moment. And just speaking for myself, just being involved with people with mesothelioma, with armed forces background, just the importance of teasing out their background when we're listening to their stories and taking histories, because often people in the armed forces don't come forward and shout about it, and if you, and obviously it's, for many people it's been a long time ago, so if you don't dig a little into that history, then you don't get it. And also from just attending things like breakfast groups, it's a privilege to see how these people deal with civilian life and look back sometimes very, very proudly on their work history, as they should. And yet we come to a point sometimes where it's all forgotten, not brought to light.
I mean, the one thing for me is that, you know, and I was even a bit remiss, and, you know, I admit that I didn't always think to ask people about if they'd been in the armed forces, particularly if they'd had a career as an electrician or something, you know, and you concentrate on that. But actually now, you know, routinely just saying to people that I meet in clinic, can I just ask you if you ever served in the armed forces? And they go, oh yeah, but I only did 4 years. And just to pause for a minute and just to say, what did you do in the army? And they just briefly, and I'll just say, that's something you should be really proud of, and, you know, thank you for all that you did in your period of service in the armed forces. And it kind of just really cements your relationship with the patient. But I think it's out of respect, you know. I think anybody in the NHS has felt that level of public support and respect, and to be able to impart that in a consultation room when somebody's feeling really on the back foot because of their health, you know, I just think it's really important. It's a really valuable thing to just acknowledge. So even something as simple as that has come out of this Armed Forces project, you know, just to acknowledge, to document, to pause, and just to show a bit of respect, really. Whether it's got implications on their diagnosis or their exposure to asbestos, you know, it is irrelevant really at that point. Because
I think like you said there, for people like you and I who've worked with people with mesothelioma for a long time, if they came in to tell you and you were asking about their work history and they said they were an electrician or a plumber or an engineer or any of those industries that we'd have really immediately associated mesothelioma with, we wouldn't have routinely thought about an armed forces background, would we? So I think that awareness has been a bit of a change game, really, in how we look back on people's work history and what we can do to help them going forward with any legal claims, etc., with regard to the mesothelioma. Yeah. So moving on from there, again, it's just like all our yesterdays, this interview. We know about Mesothelioma UK. We know where it's come from, but would you just like to give us the potted history of?
Yeah, I'm trying to keep it brief because it's you know, it's getting on for nearly 20 years ago that the idea first reared itself. But anyway, to cut a long story short, many people know that I've got a very close working relationship with Mick Peake, and Mick was recruited to come and work in Leicester to address our poor lung cancer performance across Leicestershire 20 years ago. I was a ward sister in respiratory. His beds were going to be on my ward. And so I hosted a visit that he made prior to starting to work in Leicester. Just really loved his passion and his enthusiasm for change and for service development. And they were advertising a nurse to work with him. And so it really turned our home life upside down because it meant I had to work full time. We got 3 children under 5 at the time. No, 3 children, and the eldest one was 7, I think. Anyway, to cut a long story short, applied, got the job, nurse specialist, first lung cancer nurse specialist in Leicester. I think there's a team of 6 or 7 now. Never mind meso nurse and so on, and worked closely with Mick for 4 years really with lung cancer. And it was a joy that 4 years we great team, you know, the thoracic surgeon, oncologist, radiologist, nurses, pathologists. It was just a lovely team spirit, and we really did make a huge impact, I think, on lung cancer services. But it was during that time as well, it became very apparent to me that the forgotten lung cancer patients were the mesothelioma patients. And I felt inadequate. You know, these patients would have questions and they were searching for treatment, and it was pretty bleak. This is 2001 to that kind of era. We had, like I say, a great team, not only clinically very good, but academically. And we had 2 members of the team with a real academic interest in meso. And so patients were starting to search the web. I can't remember what the web would have been like at that time, but they were finding the hospital, ringing the hospital and asking questions. And as the only nurse in the team, the calls were often put through to me. So I was, though Leicester hadn't got a high caseload of high incidence of meso, I was actually fielding calls from a lot more mesothelioma patients than I would have done otherwise. And it just became even more apparent there was a need for something national. And at the time, there was a nurse in Leeds called Mavis Robinson. She'd been awarded a Macmillan grant to establish a service for mesothelioma patients more local to the Yorkshire area, an area of high incidence. In fact, the area where June Hancock was living and treated, and her family are, and so on. And so I got a bit of a hotline to Mavis because she was the guru for kind of mesothelioma at the time. If you wanted to know anything, Mavis was your person.
I remember doing a similar visit to you to go and just suck in her knowledge, really.
Exactly that.
At Creech Hospital, wasn't she? She was based at Creech.
Yes, that's right. And it just to soak up her expertise and her knowledge. And she did an amazing service locally. But she was nearing retirement. And I remember saying to her, you know, what about maybe if we make your service national and, you know, develop a website and all the rest of it. And she said, I remember her saying to me, if you want to do that, I will support you. If you want to make the application to Macmillan, I will support you to do that because that's what it needs. And that's what we did. So with mixed support and the whole MDT in Leicester, we put in a bid. It took 2 years to negotiate with Macmillan. They were very generous. They gave us a grant in 2004 for, was it £200,000? I can't remember now. To pump prime the developing of a national Macmillan Mesothelioma Resource Centre. And that's what we were called. And I had 1 day a week of a business manager, Dawn McKinley, who is the lead for BTOG, and 4 days a week of a secretary, and me 3 days a week. 2 days a week, I remained at the hospital clinical, working in clinics. And that's how we were for quite a few years. We established a really, you know, what I would say a very good service on a bit of a shoestring, really, in some respects. But we developed a website, a whole range of information. We became accredited as an information provider. We set up a mesothelioma nurse action team. And Mavis was supportive of all of this. And then she retired, of course. And it became a very, very useful resource for anybody working in thoracic oncology, not least for patients, of course, because patients could ring us. We had a helpline, and oh my gosh, I used to do helpline calls. You name it, I was doing helpline calls all over the place. Luckily, there was a couple of nurses who were really very supportive, and their trust allowed them to be. So Papworth and the Royal Marsden were really supportive at the outset, and Sally, Erica, and Jerry Slade, Frances Mackay actually in Kent. There were a few nurses around at the time that were quite helpful. Anyway, that's how we were. But Macmillan pumped prime. They gave us a 2 years extra funding. The McKnight Mesothelioma Research Fund gave us a real chunk of money to keep us going. But Macmillan do not long-term fund. You know, that's the nature of the Macmillan funding. So we had to grow our own wings, and that's what we did. So we held a key stakeholder event. We said to people, what do you want us to do? And that was the upshot of it. Launch as an independent charity, which we did in 2009. And bearing in mind, at the helm of this is me, a nurse, you know, so I didn't have, you know, I'd been given a lump of money by Macmillan, but I hadn't really had to go out and find the money and, you know, really develop business plans to that extent. So we were a bit slow to get started. Of course, I had, you know, still mixed support, and Jeremy Steele, Barts and the London, and Dawn McKinley, you know, by my side. Jill Lemon had joined us by then. Anyway, that's how it started, and it took us a few years. We were in debt really to the University Hospital of Leicester, who have been wonderful throughout in allowing us to grow and develop. It took us a few years to get back in the black, because we owed money to the budget line in the NHS Trust and all the rest of it. But by 2012, so 4 years, I think 3-4 years, we were in a position to start appointing more nurses, and that's what we did. And from 2012, it's gone, you know, from strength to strength. I think it was 3 years ago now. That was the first year that the charity went over 1 million. And of course, we've had a tough year like everybody the last year. But, you know, the best thing I've ever done is surrounding myself with really good people like you, Lorraine, you know, finding good people to work with who get the vision, who are as passionate and just want to, you know, mesothelioma patients and their families. I beg, you know, I don't know anybody who couldn't want to do more to help them. Once you have met these people and the circumstances that they've found themselves in, and if you can, you know, if you can find other people who share that passion and wanting to do something, people who run towards a problem rather than away from it, you know, and that's the kind of people that I've managed to
can-do mentality, really.
Yeah, that can-do mentality, who, you know, the people who will cross the road to help somebody rather than pretend they haven't seen it. You know, those are the kind of people that work at Meso UK, and that's from, you know, the ops team, the trustees. They're the kind of people who want to just step up and do what they can. And you know, I mean, we've achieved a huge amount, but oh my gosh, for every one thing we've achieved, there's another 3 or 4 that we want to achieve, you know, going forward. But then that's the nature of you know.
I mean, I've said this to you before, because obviously we're nurses, we've had lots of experience, we've been in very cutting edge, really, nursing posts, you and I, and I'm very proud to have done that and taken them forward. But your business acumen leaves other nurses standing, and I think that's what we find, alongside your passion. But there's always that drive from you to do, and virtually, you know, I mean this in the nice possible way. You say jump, and we say how high, because because, you know, we're trying to follow the lead that you give us, and as I keep coming back to that business acumen. So not to be derogatory about nurses, but just to have the business side alongside the clinical side is tremendous. And in many nurses in senior posts, as you do, rely on other people to do business parts of the role, but you still have to have that acumen. I think as we've grown over the years, we've learned when to ask people to do things for us and when to employ people to do things that we can't do where funding permits. But I have to come back to that point of your business skills, really, and I don't think you always recognise it. I'm sure lots of others do, and it's something that, working alongside you, I'm very proud of. So I just wanted
That's
to.
very nice of you to say. It's very nice of you to say, Lorraine. And I guess, you know, even when I was a ward manager, I didn't really want to be a ward manager, because even then I recognised that there's a real tension. You know, nursing is a very compassionate career. It's a very you know, you naturally have that urge to mother and care, and in business that's not always the best thing. You know, that sometimes you have to do what's right for the organization and not right for the individual, and that creates a real tension, because my natural personality is that, you know, I want to make it all right for people, and I want to, and I you know, I want to be part of a team, and I want to be you know, I want to be one of the girls, and, you know, just that's my natural personality. But the business side of running a ward within the NHS, or leading a team, and then leading an organisation like Mesothelioma UK, means that that's not always the wisest thing to do. And of course, there's always how you do it, and you know, you try your best to do it well and right, but not everybody's perfect. But so that has always been a personal tension for me, and I lick my wounds really for a long time after I know that something has, you know, hasn't been great for all people in the team, or you know, and I take the knocks really hard. You know that, you've seen me take the knocks. But I'm still pretty loyal. The organisation, Meso UK, is like a being to me in a way. And I feel very loyal to Meso UK and doing what's right for that. Even, you know, recognising that, you know, it's been a major aim for me to make sure that it doesn't need me, that I can walk away. And it's pretty much there. You know, you've seen it grow, Lorraine, and you know now really that you know, whilst we've got the right people in the right places, in most of the right places, so that was what was right for the organisation. Might not be what's right for me, although it will be eventually. But
don't panic, folks. She's not walking away
no,
for the moment.
no, not at all.
Don't,
yeah, so I can honestly say that I have, I have a yes no kind of business nurse battle all the time with all sorts of things, and I have to, the best thing is I've learned not to knee jerk, is to stand back and just let the dust settle, and then think it through, and talk to people around you. But it is a real tension. But thank you for saying that, because it's not always easy at all.
No. I think similarly, we're often wounded when we hear that care isn't good for some people, or they don't get the options to know about what's open to them, or generally their care say in hospital has not been what it should be. And it's wounding, isn't it? Because of that nurturing side, we always want it to be right for people. We want to be how we would like to see it being delivered, and it's difficult in the complex environment that the NHS is. We've seen tremendous examples of during COVID-19, perhaps more than ever, really. But there are still those gaps that are left, and some people fall into those gaps, don't they?
Yeah, and I guess what I've found harder again over the years is that you can't always be there for every patient all the time, and to a lesser extent for me now. I mean, I still am clinical, and nothing gives me a bigger sense of satisfaction than actually spending half an hour with a patient and family and taking them through a situation, or preparing them for treatment or whatever it is. The level of satisfaction, I feel it's such a privilege to have the expertise and the skills to be able to tackle that kind of clinical situation, that and I hold that very dear to me, really dear to me. But the more I've moved away from that, then I hate it when I'm not there, particularly when it's a Leicester patient that I know, and things haven't gone as well as what I would have liked them to have done. And again, it's another wound licking situation, that if this and if that kind of thing. But you can't be there 24/7, and that's it.
I mean, I'm thankful that I've been able to witness that sitting alongside you, and I think you've been able to witness it sitting alongside me. And sometimes you don't even have to answer the question, do you? Because you're working closely together, you know what the answer is, so you don't have to answer the question. You can just move forward and try and do your best in caring and treating and whatever, really.
Yeah.
That's so important. And the carers and the people who are looking after them as well, so not to forget that. So right, we're digressing here, but what about the future then? You've touched on the future a little. What's the future for Mesothelioma UK, do you think?
Well, I mean, I'm pretty... Laurie Casanallen contacted me this week after reading the Meso Matters magazine, and I always love to hear from Laurie, because she, a spade's a spade with Laurie, and she was so complimentary about the content of the magazine, and it really does showcase the breadth of activity and work that the charity does.
I'm saying to people, I think it gets better, and obviously I'm biased, but I think it gets better with every edition, and I think that's really good to see.
So I think more of the same, if I'm honest.
It's out this week, by the way, folks. It's released this week.
Well, it is, but we might not be playing this recording of this interview until next week.
Right.
Anyway,
next week, yeah.
So I guess more of the same, if I'm honest, is what we need. But we, lots of people know that we launched the research centre with Sheffield. So the Mesothelioma UK Research Centre Sheffield opened last year, and so research and audit are high on the list of our priorities. We want to steadily grow the nursing team and develop them and enrich the nursing team, make sure we've got the whole country covered. We haven't got any footprint in Northern Ireland yet, and we're keen to do that. We'd like to help Wales get established in a similar way to Scotland. so the nurses is always going to be up there, but audit and research are real key, really figure high in our priorities. And I think after that, I think MDT development, we have got metrics now in England and in Scotland, and I think we need to help the NHS to develop structure and services that enable them to work towards meeting those metrics. And mesothelioma MDTs are a very fundamental part of that. So I think that's something. But of course, we've had a bad year financially, like all charities. I mean, ours hasn't been as bad as others because we're a charity that is growing. So it actually slowed our growth a lot more. You know, we've had a bit of a flat year. And thanks to the amazing, you know, ops team and fundraising team, it's not been as bad as what it could have been. So it's all income dependent. And I've said this for 5 years now, that we will be able to achieve our vision if our income reaches 3 million a year. And we haven't got to half of that yet. So it's all income dependent, but those are the kind of things. So the nursing team will be a continual focus for us. I think audit and research are going to increasingly figure in our spending and in our activities. And then the additional thing will be about helping the NHS to develop that infrastructure to meet the metrics that have been set, really.
Yeah, brilliant. Only a little bit of work to do.
Yeah, not
but we'll all carry on trying to do it together. Anything else you'd like to say, Liz? Anything you'd like to tell people going in after the interview?
I guess I'm blown away by people's generosity. You know, from the young boy who's been climbing the stairs to, you know, over through lockdown to, you know, families giving really large donations after the loss of somebody, and just I'm blown away by people's generosity, you know, in that hour of need. And you know, I think, you know, I fundraise for charities and I do things that are meaningful to me. You know, the curse of my family has been heart disease, and you know, so that's something dear to my heart, and I know that I get a lot out of giving something back in a way. So I know that, you know, it can help people, but it still never ceases to amaze me. And it can really still every day, you know, it doesn't matter whether it's a £10 or a 10,000 donation. Sometimes just the words, the letter, the effort just stops me in my tracks, completely and utterly stops me in my tracks. And then I start to get a bit scared and think about the responsibility of taking that money that people have, you know, blood, sweat and tears raised. And but yeah, I'm really grateful to the people that you know, believed in the charity and you know, have been really supportive of the charity and continue to be, and just really a promise that, you know, we will always do our best to spend that money wisely, and we're increasingly trying to make sure that we've got a really broad group of people advising us about how best to spend that money. So so thank you to those people, and huge thank you to the nurses, the ops team, the trustees, the ambassadors, and the advisory groups that we've got, because you know, they're what make the charity tick, and we couldn't do it without them. So just you know, lots of gratitude really, and thanks to people, and well, let's do more of the same.
Yeah, more of the same. Well, thanks for joining me today. Thanks for bringing everybody up to date, and we just hope we go forward from strength to strength.
Yeah, we will. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Yeah. Let me stop recording.